Things are arguably worse now than they were back then, but the market's holding up better. Does that make any sense at all to you? The answer is yes, it does.
Is to use the rally to lighten up on risk, because I think that's just too much of a probability of a policy mistake.
Welcome back to Wealthy Value. The US government has pushed a total of $9 trillion into the economy since the start of the pandemic. With tax dollars so desperately needed, the IRS is looking to crack down on cryptocurrency. But what if you could trade crypto tax-free? Here's how to do it in 60 seconds. Step 1. Open a crypto IRA account with our friends at iTrust Capital, the world's largest crypto IRA platform with over $3.5 billion in transactions, over 1,500 positive reviews on Trustpilot, and no monthly fees. Step 2. You can transfer your existing IRA, roll over your employer plan, or make a cash contribution through ACH transfer, bank wire, or check. Step 3. Start investing. Available assets include not just Bitcoin and Ethereum, but also Cardano, Chainlink, Polkadot, and all major cryptocurrencies, as well as physical gold and silver. No taxable events mean no complex tracking needed, and security is the best in the industry. All digital assets are held in offline cold storage with the leading institutional custodians, Curve and Coinbase Custody, which are both insured and backed by the largest venture capital firms in crypto. Use our link itrust.capital/value in the description below and get $100 in Bitcoin when you open and fund your account.
There really isn't much quote-unquote bad news that hasn't been priced in. The thing that I've learned over the last few years is that markets don't actually care what the news is. They can process good news and bad news equally well. What they despise is the uncertainty of what the news could be. And so this week was really important because we had two huge buckets of uncertainty taken out of the market. So the one we've already talked about, which is when the market saw that there was a surface area of a deal between Ukraine and Russia that was really constructive, because neither side would have signaled something if both parties were very far apart. So that meant to the markets, we're a few weeks out from something getting done. And then the second thing was Jerome Powell and the Federal Reserve. They finally had their meeting. They raised rates 25 basis points. But even more importantly, they gave you a very prescriptive forecast of what the next year will look like at a minimum, and possibly even 2 years. And once you could have that, you were able to then go and redo all of your expectations. And what people realized was, okay, inflation may actually start to get tamed in the back half of the year. The economy is still quite strong. And we could actually support 2.5% interest rates and still actually grow really well. And so what you've seen in the last 3 or 4 days is a reaction to the loss of uncertainty. And so there really isn't, the only thing, the fly in the ointment could be if the war all of a sudden escalates. Not that it gets dragged on, because at that point, that's also, I think, been priced in. But if something very meaningfully different and Russia, in this case, ratchets up the intensity. But in the absence of these things, you basically have really constructive dynamics right now for at least the next month and a half, maybe even 2 months. What it actually helps you do is pick out better signal. And, with all respect, Sachs, I think like a lot of what you said is not really as meaningful signal as the following, which is the most important thing that happened was both sides basically said the surface area of a deal was very much in sight and that they were down to 3 or 4 points. And I think that didn't get reported nearly as much as it probably should have. And what I thought was psychologically interesting was that as soon as that was said, the next few days was when the rhetoric got ratcheted up extremely aggressively on both sides. And the way that I interpret that typically is, having done deals, that's typically when you're closest to a deal and you're trying to get the last few T's and C's. And in that same construct as applied to Ukraine and Russia, I suspect what's happening is they both put out the trial balloon. It was well received on both sides. The surface area is now down to a few points. I'm not saying that those are justifiable in the end, but I think that if both of these two parties want to come to a ceasefire, which I think it does, We're probably much, much closer than anybody thinks. And right now, all of this rhetoric is meant to basically try to get the other side to budge a little bit more. And so I suspect, and I could be completely wrong, is that we're much closer to a ceasefire than anybody thinks. And I suspect that you could see something in the next 2 to 3 weeks. The thing is, we can't even estimate correctly. So, for example, There was something that said there was 100 out of 100. Russia has 170 battalions, apparently. I don't know if that's true or not.
Right.
Of which 100 were sent in. We don't know if that's true or not. Of which Ukraine apparently destroyed 50. Of which we don't know if that's true or not. So we're left to guess. And unfortunately, what that does is that people psychologically then fit, as David has used in the past, your priors. What are your biases? Right? What narrative fallacy do you want to believe? And then you're going to fit. So the pro-Russian factions will say that's entirely not true. The pro-Ukrainian factions will say, actually, it's even greater than that, huge sustained military losses. The truth is somewhere in the middle that will only get accounted for after a ceasefire is in place. So I think we almost need to, again, we can get caught in this fog of war and talk about this stuff in ways which we don't accurately know. Or we can level up and say, the thing that we both know is there was on the record statements by the foreign minister of Russia and the president of Ukraine that a ceasefire and the surface area of that ceasefire is within sight. And unless something is materially changed, and in the last 3 days, which it hasn't, it means we are really, really close to this being done. Retail is not a very good signal of anything. In fact, if you actually look at retail flows, typically you will make money by doing the exact opposite of what retail does. And I posted this in the group chat to you guys, every single day of since the beginning of this year, retail was a net buyer. In all of those days, the market got punched in the face. Finally, at the beginning of March, retail capitulated, right? And I posted that same day and I said, guys, this is the moment to buy. And lo and behold, what happened? The markets rallied meaningfully from that point. And the reason is because they were going into the end of Q1. You have a huge tax bill due in April 15th. People were starting to just finally give up. They were buying every single day and they finally gave up. But that capitulation was the moment that you buy. So if anything, retail is the, I've said before, you fade your fade list. Retail flows are something you typically will make money by fading, by doing the exact opposite of whatever retail is doing. We're finding out all of these externalities that was made with underlying poor scientific reasoning that has caused these issues to be exacerbated. So we know, for example, that our over-reliance on Russian hydrocarbons could have been mitigated with nuclear, but we fell for shoddy science and we fell for a bunch of uninformed people who ran this banner of environmental protection, right? So they screwed us, okay? And those people now have meaningfully less credibility. Let me give you another cohort, Freeberg, and you tell me. All the people that pushed back on GMO and said GMO was unacceptable, it could never happen, it has to be X, Y, and Z way. And there are ways where we could have been working on plants that had different mechanisms of action in order to actually absorb and retain nutrients from the soil in different ways that would have made us less reliant in exactly the way in which fertilizer works. True or false? I think we suffer from a very insidious kind of plague in the world, which is the plague of overeducated dumb people. And it's almost as if, because of their degree in the school, you give them inordinate power to make value judgments that really put the world in a very difficult position. And so when you have something like a war in Ukraine, it just lays everything bare. And you find all these things like, another version of this example. How did an entire continent, and specifically I mean Europe, abdicate their entire energy security to a group of environmentalists and to a 16-year-old girl without even thinking about what the right answer was for themselves from first principles? That's really crazy that happened. And you need a war where tens of thousands of people have to die to realize that was a really bad set of decisions that have been compounding for decades. Here's another example where food security is yet another one where, we weren't able to think cleanly from first principles. And so depending on who had more money or who was able to create more psychological guilt or fear, was able to get an outcome that fundamentally puts the world at 100 million person plus famine. The foreign policy playbook is going to get fundamentally rewritten after this Russia-Ukraine war, in large part because of the effectiveness of government sanctions plus corporate social responsibility, whatever you want to call that. But the combination of these two things has proved to be incredibly effective at setting the stage for some sort of compromise or regime change. The spectrum of outcomes is there. But the point is, that's an incredibly unique set of circumstances where before we never would have thought an economy that large or a country that important on the world stage would ever have compromised in the absence of military intervention. And I think that that's important to think about as we think about what our forward-going China policy looks like. I think really like the importance of like the OECD, right? The importance of all these organized nations that consume from China, becoming more organized now probably makes more sense. I said this before in a tweet, but the importance of the US dollar has become completely primary, which has been an incredible benefit of what has happened because of this war. Very small silver linings in the grand scheme of all of this humanitarian crisis, but those are going to be really important things that the United States can seize on. So